Good evening, my friend. I'm glad you've joined me tonight. Maybe you're listening from your kitchen, a warm drink in your hand, or maybe you're in your car, letting the steady rhythm of the road keep you company. Wherever you are, I hope this feels like sitting across from someone who isn't in a hurry, like a quiet table in the corner, a space where the truth can rest between us, without fear, without judgment. The letter I'm holding tonight, it's heavy, not because of the paper, but because of the years it carries. It comes from a woman who spent her life in classrooms. The smell of chalk, the soft thud of books closing, the sound of rain against wide windows, these were the sounds of her world. In all those years, there was one student she never forgot, a boy who kept to himself, quiet, always near the window, as if he was half here and half somewhere else entirely. She thought she could save him. She thought her care would be enough. But she missed the signs, and years later, she would hear the news that he was gone in a way that left no more chances, no more words to say. Now, she writes her last letter, a letter to him, and maybe to herself, hoping that somehow the truth she carries might still find its way to someone who needs to hear it. If you're ready, let's read it together. She calls it, "I was a teacher, and I once thought I could save someone from the dark." Tonight I'm sitting at my kitchen table. The wood is worn smooth from years of elbows and coffee cups. The lamp above me throws a warm circle of light, just enough to keep the rest of the room in shadow. Outside, rain taps against the glass, slow, steady, like it knows I'm listening. And as I sit here, I see you again. Third row by the window, afternoon sunlight spilling across your desk, turning chalk dust into tiny white butterflies drifting in the air. Your notebook always neat, ink stains curling on your fingers like little blue crescents. You didn't speak much. When the class laughed, you'd only let the corner of your mouth lift. Once, the hallway clock ticked louder than usual and you flinched. I noticed, but I told myself I'd ask you later. Then the bell rang, chairs scraped, and I was pulled into the noise of another school day. Now, I know your silence wasn't peace. It was water slowly rising, and I was too busy staring at the patterns on the wall. Back then, I thought caring was enough. I thought showing up every day, smiling, remembering your name, was enough to keep the darkness away. But darkness doesn't care about names. It doesn't care if the person in front of you means well. It waits, quiet, patient, for the moment no one is looking. I didn't see how you lingered in the doorway after class, how you always sat a little apart at lunch, how your eyes searched the floor when someone called your name. I told myself, he's just shy, and that was the end of it. It's strange how we build these stories to protect ourselves from what we don't want to face. I see that now. But back then, I chose the easier story. The winter of that year came early. Frost spread across the windows before the leaves were done falling. Inside the classroom, the heater rattled in the corner, a tired, uneven sound, while we sat bundled in sweaters, our breath fogging in the morning light. You seemed smaller in your seat, not physically but in presence, like a candle whose flame had begun to flicker low. I remember you tracing the edges of your notebook page over and over, your pencil never quite touching the paper. And one day in that stillness you looked up at me, not with a question, not even with words, just a glance that felt like it was holding something heavy, something I didn't recognize then, but I can't unsee now. It's strange how memory works. At the time it was just a moment, one heartbeat in 1,000, but now it has grown into a doorway I can't stop opening. Every time I step through it I see the same thing, you and me and the silence between us. There was a field trip that winter, one of those small-town traditions. The whole class walked down to the old community hall to see the holiday display. Strings of colored lights hung from the rafters, the smell of cinnamon cider drifted in from the kitchen, and somewhere, a record player hummed with an old carol. I remember standing near the table of gingerbread houses, listening to the hum of voices, and then, I saw you at the edge of the room, hands shoved deep into your coat pockets, eyes fixed on the floorboards. The others were laughing over cookies and cocoa, but you looked like you were trying to become invisible. I walked over. I meant to say something, anything, but all that came out was a comment about the cold weather. You gave a polite nod, and then someone else called my name, and I turned away. Looking back, that was my chance. Maybe you were waiting for someone to notice, to pull you into the warmth. Instead, I left you standing in the shadows, with the music and laughter just out of reach. After the holidays, the light changed. Mornings arrived pale, and by the last bell, the playground already wore its long shadows. Inside, the radiator clicked and sighed, and the room held that faint smell of dry erase cleaner and wet coats. You began to miss days, then 2 in a row. When you came back, you kept your jacket on, your handwriting smaller, tighter, as if even your words were retreating. At dismissal, you hovered near the door, then slipped away before I found the right question. I found a crumpled note under your desk. Your script, thin, careful. I want the noise to stop. I told myself it meant chatter, the heater, the hallway. I flattened the paper, placed it in my drawer, a promise to follow up. Tomorrow. Now I know. Some papers are alarms, not assignments, and a drawer can be the quietest place a plea ever goes. February arrived grey and low. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, as if the sky were thinking out loud. We were halfway through silent reading when the principal stepped into the doorway. Her eyes found you first. "Bring your things," she said softly. You stood, backpack strap frayed, coat sleeve riding up your wrist. Your chair scraped, a small, startled sound. You nodded to no one, and the hallway swallowed your footsteps. All afternoon I listened for your return. Every hinge squeak a maybe. The clock hands dragged, the room smelled faintly of wet wool and pencil shavings, and the window kept its patient cold. You didn't come back. Later I learned there would be no tomorrow in my classroom for you. No details, just absence, louder than any bell I ever heard. Weeks passed, and your absence sat in the room like another desk, empty but always there. The other kids learned to stop asking. They filled your chair with their coats, borrowed your pencils without thinking. But I noticed, the air felt heavier near that corner. Sometimes I caught myself glancing at the doorway, expecting the faint shuffle of your shoes, the way you'd push your hair back before speaking. The doorway stayed empty. Only the faint echo of the hallway clock reached us, counting hours you would not see. In the lunchroom, 2 students whispered about you, their voices quick, eyes darting like they'd touched something sharp. Rumors are restless creatures. They move faster than truth, and they never care who they wound. I didn't correct them. I didn't know what to say. Silence, I thought, might protect you, but silence also feeds shadows, and each day the shadow in my chest grew longer. By spring, the trees outside the classroom began to green again, but the season felt borrowed, as if it didn't belong to us. Your name wasn't spoken anymore, yet it lived in the space between sentences. One afternoon, as I sorted graded papers, I overheard 2 parents in the hallway. Their tone was careful, the kind people use when grief is close by. They said your name like it was fragile, and then, words I couldn't unhear. Something about moving away, about things that couldn't be fixed. No details, just the soft weight of pity in their voices. It made the walls feel smaller, the air tighter. That night I walked home slower, passing the corner store where you once bought a red notebook, the park bench where you read during recess. Each place felt like a question I hadn't answered in time. Summer arrived, but it didn't feel like the kind we'd waited for all year. The playground was still busy, kids still laughed, but every time I heard their voices, I wondered if they knew how quickly laughter could turn into something else. I kept expecting to see you in the most ordinary places, by the drinking fountain leaning against the rail outside the gym. I even found myself looking for you in the lineup for the school bus, searching faces that had never been yours. I asked the principal once quietly after a staff meeting. He didn't meet my eyes, just said, "He won't be coming back," in a tone that told me the conversation was over. That was all I got, a sentence, and a silence that stretched too far. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, watching its blades turn like they might stir up answers, but all they moved was the warm summer air. Weeks later I went to the library downtown, not for books but because I'd heard sometimes you came there after school. The woman at the desk looked at me strangely when I asked if she'd seen you. She said she remembered you, how quiet you were, how you always returned books early, spines uncreased as if you'd barely touched them. And then she hesitated, her voice lowering. They said he moved in with relatives, in another state. No one seemed to know more than that. Or maybe they did and they simply decided I didn't need to. I walked home with empty hands, feeling like I'd just checked out a book with all the pages torn out. That evening I sat on my porch and watched the sun go down, its last light spilling over the street. It felt like a story ending, not because it had finished, but because someone had stopped telling it. By the time autumn came, the air had that sharp edge in the mornings that made you pull your jacket tighter. I thought maybe the change in season would make it easier, like the leaves falling could carry away the questions I never got answered. But you were still in my thoughts, woven into the smallest things. The smell of chalk dust, the squeak of sneakers in the hallway, even the way the sunlight slanted through the classroom windows. Each one felt like a thread pulling me back to a place where you still stood at the front of the room. Sometimes, I would imagine walking into class one morning and finding you there again, tie crooked, coffee steaming in your hand, that calm voice saying, "All right, let's begin." But the image would fade, and the empty space would remain. It was around then that I began to understand how absence isn't just a lack of presence, it's a presence of its own, heavy, shaping everything around it. One rainy afternoon I stayed late after school. The halls were quiet, except for the soft hum of the vending machine and the distant drip of water near the lockers. I found myself in the supply closet, digging through old boxes for a project. That's when I saw it, a small cardboard carton with your name scrawled across the side. Inside were lesson plans, a mug with a faded school logo, and a stack of papers still marked with your handwriting. It felt wrong, seeing those things tucked away like that, as if you'd just vanished, and the pieces of your life had been left behind for anyone to stumble over. I sat there for a long time, running my fingers over the worn handle of the mug, trying to imagine where you might be now. When I finally put the box back, it felt heavier than when I'd lifted it, maybe because I was carrying more than just its weight. Winter settled in hard that year. Mornings began in darkness and the frost on the windows looked like white lace someone had pressed against the glass. I would sit at my desk before class, watching my breath cloud the air, and think about how cold the room felt without you. There were whispers sometimes, from students, from teachers, little fragments of rumor that never answered anything. Some said you had moved far away, others hinted at reasons too heavy for them to say aloud. I never asked, and maybe that was my way of protecting myself, because once you know the truth, you can't unhear it. But the not knowing was its own kind of ache, one that settled deep, the way winter cold does, seeping into your bones. Even then, I kept hoping that one day you'd walk back through the door, that your chair in the staff room wouldn't stay empty forever. But hope, I was learning, can grow heavy too. One evening after dismissal, I stayed behind to grade papers. The school was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels bigger than the walls. I could hear the echo of my own pen scratches, the faint tick of the clock above the blackboard. I don't know what made me do it, but I wandered down to your old classroom. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside, everything looked smaller than I remembered. The desks lined up neatly, the board wiped clean, the smell of old books still hanging in the air. I stood there for a long time, remembering the way you used to pace slowly as you spoke, one hand in your pocket, the other tapping the chalk against your palm. It was such a simple rhythm, but I realized in that moment how much it had anchored me back then. When I finally stepped out and closed the door, it felt like I was sealing something away, something I might never get back. Spring crept in quietly that year. The snow melted in uneven patches and the first hints of green pushed through the damp earth. Kids started gathering outside again during lunch, their laughter floating through the open windows. But for me, the season felt muted. I kept looking for something, or maybe someone, that I knew wouldn't be there. It's strange how absence can color everything, turning even sunlight into something bittersweet. There was a day when the principal stopped me in the hallway. She asked if I was doing better now, like the whole matter with you was something I could just move past. I nodded, because that's what was expected. But inside, the questions were still loud. Why you left, what I could have done differently, whether you ever knew that I noticed your absence every single day. Those questions never stayed quiet for long. One Saturday, I was in the library returning a stack of books. The librarian, a kind older woman who had been there since I was a child, recognized me and asked about you. Her voice was casual, but her eyes searched mine for an answer. I told her I didn't know where you were now. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either, because even if I had known, what would I have said? That I'd heard things? That whispers still trailed your name? That I was too afraid to find out what was real? She sighed, and I saw her shoulders drop a little. It was the first time I realized that your absence didn't just belong to me. Other people missed you too. People who had their own memories, their own quiet grief. And somehow that made mine feel both heavier and lighter all at once. By summer, I thought maybe the ache would soften. The long days, the sound of cicadas, the smell of freshly cut grass, all the things that used to mean freedom, they should have helped. But every warm breeze carried something else. A memory, a sound, the faint echo of your voice reading aloud in class. It's strange how a season can hold more ghosts than any winter. One afternoon I passed by the old corner store near the school. You used to stop there for coffee before first period. I remember watching you walk in, the bell over the door giving that soft ring. That day I stood outside for a while, long enough to smell the same faint blend of coffee and paper cups, long enough to picture you stepping out, balancing your drink, smiling without even realizing it. But the door stayed shut, and the moment dissolved like heat on pavement. The following week I found an old notebook while cleaning my room. Inside, tucked between math problems and doodles, was a folded piece of paper, your handwriting. It was a note you'd given me once, a simple encouragement after I'd stumbled through a presentation. You did well, it said, proud of you for trying. No one had ever written something like that to me before. I ran my fingers over the letters, tracing each curve of the ink, wondering if you'd meant it as much as I'd needed it. And then it hit me. You'd probably given out dozens of notes like that, little lifelines you never knew would be kept for years. I pressed the paper flat, slipped it into the back of my journal, and sat there for a long while, because that one short sentence still felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady, present, even after you were gone. There's a strange cruelty in how certain moments can feel both brand new and impossibly old at the same time. That's what happened the day I saw someone who looked like you. It was at the bus stop, just outside the library. From behind, the tilt of the shoulders, the way he held his bag, it was so close my breath caught. For a second, my mind played a trick. I thought maybe you'd returned, that the years had been some kind of bad dream. But when he turned, his face was wrong, too young, too unlined by the kind of patience you carried. And in that moment, I realized how deep the missing went, how even a stranger's shadow could stir the ache again. I didn't get on the bus that day. I just stood there, watching the stranger walk away, letting the hope fade quietly, the way dusk swallows the last bit of light. That night, I dreamed of your classroom. Everything was the same, the wooden desks, the chalkboards smudged in pale dust, the faint hum of the old ceiling fan. You were there, writing something on the board, but when I tried to read it, the letters kept shifting, blurring into shapes I didn't understand. I called your name, but the sound didn't leave my mouth. You turned, and your eyes, they weren't angry, just tired. When I woke, the feeling clung to me like humidity. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to shake it off, but it stayed. Maybe it was my mind's way of telling me that time doesn't erase a truth we've refused to face. And I think, deep down, I already knew there would come a day I'd have to stop avoiding that truth. It was early spring when the phone call came. The kind of morning where the air smells faintly of rain, and the light is still soft enough to make you believe in gentler things. A friend from town, someone I hadn't heard from in years, asked if I'd seen the news. Her voice was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether she should be the one to tell me. And then she said your name. The words that followed didn't feel real at first. They never do they? She said you were gone, that it hadn't been an accident, that you'd chosen it. I thanked her, though I don't remember how. When I hung up, the quiet in my apartment felt sharper than any sound, like the walls themselves were pressing closer. I sat there, watching the steam fade from my untouched coffee, and all I could think was, I'd always imagined there would be time to explain, time to say I was sorry, time to undo something. The funeral was small, too small for the impact you had, but I suppose that's the way it is when people drift away quietly, long before their bodies do. I stood at the back, hands clasped so tight I could feel my nails in my skin. Your picture sat at the front, younger than when I knew you, hair darker, eyes brighter. Someone had chosen a photo from better days. I listened as people spoke, colleagues, neighbors, a few students whose faces I didn't recognize. They all talked about your kindness, your patience, the way you made learning feel like a shared adventure, and every word was another twist of the knife. Because I knew, even if they didn't, that part of the shadow you'd carried to your grave had my name on it. After the service, I stayed in the parking lot for a long while. People trickled out in clusters, their voices low, their coats pulled tight against the wind. Some hugged me, though they didn't know why I was really there. Others just nodded politely as if I were another distant face from the past. When the last car pulled away, I sat alone in mine, watching the sky shift from pale grey to bruised purple. And I thought, how strange it is that the world keeps moving when one of its pieces is gone. I imagined the last days you spent here, who you spoke to, whether anyone noticed the way you looked at the ground more often, whether you'd packed away your things or left them where they fell. I wondered if you thought of me. I prayed you didn't, because if you had, I can't imagine the kind of memory it must have been. Days turned into weeks, but the letter stayed in that drawer, its presence like a small weight I carried everywhere. I'd open the drawer sometimes just to look at the envelope, to remind myself it was still there, and every time I'd feel the same ache. I started noticing how certain things brought you back to me. The smell of chalk dust in an old bookstore, the hum of a ceiling fan in a quiet room, the way autumn light slants through the windows, casting long, soft shadows on the floor. Each one was a thread pulling me back to that classroom. And in those moments I'd catch myself wondering, if you had stayed, what would your life have been? Would you have found joy again? Would you have stood at the front of the class telling bad jokes and drawing crooked diagrams on the board just to make us laugh? Or had I taken that from you completely? One rainy afternoon I found myself walking past the school. The building looked smaller than I remembered, the bricks more faded, the playground empty. The bell rang and a flood of children poured out, their backpacks bouncing, their voices carrying into the street. I stood under the awning across the road, watching them run into the arms of waiting parents. For a moment I could almost see you, standing by the door, greeting each student by name, reminding them to finish their homework. The vision faded quickly, but it left me with a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. That's when I knew. I couldn't keep the letter hidden forever. Even if you'd never read it, even if it changed nothing, I had to let it go, because holding on to it was like standing in that same classroom, year after year, waiting for you to walk in. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The letter lay in front of me, its edges slightly curled, the ink inside already fading in my memory. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of every word I'd written. I thought about sealing it in an envelope, addressing it to your last known school and sending it, even though I didn't know if you'd be there, or if you were even alive. But I also thought about slipping it between the pages of a book you might have once read, and leaving it in the library. Somehow, both ideas felt equally impossible and necessary. I whispered your name into the quiet, as if testing how it sounded after all these years. It still felt natural on my tongue, like a song you never forget. And in that moment I realized that maybe the real reason I'd kept this letter wasn't to give it to you. It was to keep you alive, even if only in my thoughts. The rain started again, tapping softly against the window. I found myself remembering the day you stayed after class to help me with my writing assignment. I had been struggling, erasing the same sentence over and over, and you told me, sometimes the right words come only after you've written the wrong ones. Those words had stayed with me far longer than I realized, and now, sitting here with this letter, I couldn't help but think, this might be one of those wrong ones. Maybe it was too late, maybe it was too much, maybe it was nothing you'd ever want to read, but it was mine, and it was the truest thing I'd ever written. I folded it carefully, tucked it back into the drawer for one last night, and promised myself, tomorrow I'd decide what to do with it, whether that meant letting it go or keeping it forever. Either way, it was time. Morning came softly, light slipping through the thin curtains. I woke before the kettle started its low rumble, before the world outside had found its noise. The letter was still in the drawer, right where I'd left it. I sat at the table with my tea, watching steam curl and fade, and felt the familiar knot in my chest. I knew, if I didn't decide now, I might never decide at all. So I took it out, ran my fingers over the paper, and whispered the words one more time. Forgive me. I slipped the letter into an envelope, no return address, only your name written in my careful hand. It felt like closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for decades, and yet it also felt like stepping into a silence I wasn't sure I could bear. By the time the sun had climbed high, I was walking toward the post office. The envelope was light in my hand, but heavy in every other way. At the corner I paused, looked up at the pale blue sky, and thought about the boy you once were, tie askew, smile shy, eyes holding more than anyone realized. I didn't know if this letter would reach you. I didn't know if you'd want it to, but I needed to send it, not just for you, but for me, because some truths shouldn't die inside us. When I finally let it slip into the mailbox, there was no rush of relief, no sudden lightness, only a quiet knowing that I had done the only thing left to do, and maybe, somewhere in the vast, unpredictable weave of the world, that truth would find you. Tonight's story is not just about a quiet boy or a teacher carrying her regret, but a reminder that sometimes we don't realize what we've missed until there's no way back. That boy might have only needed a single look of care, a genuine question, or someone simply sitting beside him, but no one gave him that in time, and that teacher carried that silence for the rest of her life. If you're hearing me now, I hope that, when you see someone suffering in silence, you pause, you step closer, and you let them know they are not alone. We cannot change the past, but we can save someone right here in this present moment. Thank you for taking this time to be here, and for listening to this story with me. I hope it will make you pay closer attention to the quiet spaces around you.